Do you like living here?
Yeah. Well, my son just lives over here. Sorry.
77-year-old Rod Hill says his emotions have been untuned since a stroke 2 years ago. He's lived at Winsome Place Apartments for 15 years. He doesn't want to leave, but a few weeks ago his landlord asked him to agree to an over 40% rent increase. And if he doesn't pay, they'll look to sell his apartment on the open market.
That's a little hard when you're on a restricted income. You know, I'm just getting a Canada pension. I don't know why they're doing it, other than pure greed.
A neighbor who's lived here over 20 years is in the same boat. She remembers getting the notice slid under her door.
I nearly fainted. I just sat on the floor and cried. I was terrified. I was just terrified. Not just about paying the money, that I'm on a pension. I can't afford it. But what's my alternative, you know?
The landlord wouldn't talk to CBC, but in the letter to Hill and De Gonzalez wrote that building expenses have gone up. It notes that because it is actually a stratified condominium building that has just been rented out by the landlord, the units can be sold, and the sales could begin in July. And if the new buyer wants to move in, the renters could be evicted, but they won't be sold if they agree to pay up. Now, you might think to yourself that how is a 40% rent increase even possible? Aren't annual rent increases capped at, 1 or 2% or some calculation involving inflation? In fact, if a landlord and a renter come to a mutual agreement on a higher rent increase, that's completely allowable. And some experts are saying that as the rental market gets out of control, more and more landlords are using threats to get their tenants to agree to these high rent increases.
Since we're starting from a point where the building's already stratified, it makes the threat, I think, much more real.
He says Winsome's situation has some unusual aspects, but often landlords will demand more rent by saying they will use the suite themselves, either personally or for their family.
I think what it ultimately is an example of how our current regulations to try and keep housing affordable don't fully function.
The residential tenancy branch says they are speaking to the landlord to find out more info and make sure he follows the rules. But for these renters seeking affordability, it feels like a door is closing. Liam Britten, CBC News, Surrey.